The anime begins with Haruka, our edgelord, crouched behind a tree witnessing your family reunion, only to blow his cover by stepping on the smallest twig that is smaller than your peen. The goblin spotted him and gave chase, but Haruka smirked, confident in his abilities. As he leaped into the air, the goblins all stumbled into the trap he'd set. Pleased with himself, Haruka silently congratulated himself for surviving solo in another world. The scene shifts to the past, explaining how Haruka ended up in this situation. Born a natural loner, he never wanted anything to do with his classmates, finding them annoying and a distraction from what he loved most, reading. Back in his classroom, the social divisions were obvious. Big giant girls, delinquents, jocks, nerds, the class rep, and the rest. However, Haruka didn't belong to any of them, and he liked it that way. One day, a magic circle appeared in the middle of class. Haruka, being a fan of manga, recognized it but also remembered how annoying it would be to get stuck in another world. He hinted the idea of being surrounded by people. As panic ensued, he tried to make his escape, cleverly crawling into an air vent. But to his luck, the magic circle expanded, chasing him, and eventually he ended up in the typical white void. Haruka knew the drill from reading so much manga and wondered when the king and his unattainable daughter would show up. Instead, some frantic old guide who looked like a god beckoned him over. It turned out that Haruka's classmates had already been summoned to the new world, and he was the last to be teleported. Before his transfer, Haruka was allowed to pick his stats and skills. A giant menu then popped up with his options, but to his surprise, all the good skills were taken. He was left with useless ones like stick holding, good health, and walking. Browsing through the leftovers, he found titles like Shut-In and NEET, which only made him feel worse. Furious, Haruka demanded better options, but the old god, fed up, decided to dump all the remaining skills on him at once. So Haruka entered the new world with a pool of useless abilities and a bag that could hold an unlimited number of items. Checking his stats, Haruka was told to roll dice. Annoyed, he remembered this obscure skill and reluctantly rolled the dice, getting a double M. Not knowing what it meant, he assumed it stood for masochist, expecting the worst. However, his stat screen prompted him to allocate points, so he dumped everything into luck, thinking raw stats wouldn't help him survive with his lame skills. Then it hit him. M stood for max, and his luck stat was now maxed out. Surprised, Haruka noticed 2 extra skills among the sea of worthless ones. Apparently, because he was summoned alone, he received the loner title, which prevented him from joining any parties. He also gained his servitude skill, allowing him to command others, which was cool, but it meant his dreams of a harem were over. Haruka briefly wondered where his classmates were, but it didn't matter since he couldn't join forces with them anyway. Ready to start his adventure, he focused on finding a base of operations. In the forest, denser than your mom, he worried about encountering monsters. He searched for a useful skill, but only thought of one that allowed him to doze off. While sorting through his items, he tried on some contact lenses, which surprisingly gave him the appraisal skill. This helped him find edible mushrooms that boosted his abilities. With his bottomless bag, he grabbed as many as he could, apologizing to the bag for initially thinking it was useless. After drinking some water, he heard a noise in the distance. Following the sound, he discovered a cave. Praying he wouldn't run into any monsters, Haruka decided to make it his base. With his camping gear and temperature magic, he lit a small fire and realized that his supposedly useless leftover skills were turning out to be more helpful than he thought. Haruka checks his stats again and is surprised to see his temperature magic has leveled up, unlocking fire magic. This could be helpful, but he still worries about how he'll handle a monster if one shows up, since right now his only weapon is a stick. Despite these concerns, he ends up falling asleep without a care. The next morning, Haruka wakes to find everything is fine. His items repel monsters, and his shut-in title creates a protective barrier around his base. Now that he has fire magic, starting a fire is much easier, so he cooks himself some breakfast. He uses the beef jerky from his bag and the mushrooms he found the day before. The meal is surprisingly delicious, and Haruka feels grateful for his villager starter bag, though he thinks it's more of a survivalist's kit. Determined to gather more food, Haruka heads out but knows his top priority is figuring out how to protect himself from monsters. Unfortunately, his worst fear comes true when he encounters 2 goblins. Though they're small fry monsters, their stats are higher than he expected. Haruka doubts he can win but realizes he has no choice. Eventually, he'll have to learn how to fight monsters. His stick seems inadequate, but he remembers he has a skill called wrapping, which lets him enhance objects with magic. This makes his stick stronger, and Haruka becomes determined to survive even without any cheat skills. Haruka launches his first ever attack, taking the first goblin by surprise and brutally beating it down. The second goblin tries to strike, but its moves are clumsy, and Haruka dodges with ease. During the fight, he instinctively taps into a new power and eliminates the second goblin. Afterward, he feels proud of his victory and heads back to his base, bringing one of the goblin's clubs with him. However, after comparing it with his enhanced stick, he decides to stick with what he has. Upon checking his stats, Haruka is thrilled to see that he leveled up and his stats have more than doubled. His cane mastery leveled up as well, which confuses him since all he did was swing the stick a few times. He also gained magic infusion, likely from enchanting his stick, and even his calisthenics skill improved, which he jokingly attributes to his habit of never skipping morning exercises. Later, Haruka gets tired of eating mushrooms and longs for meat, but knows the class rep would scold him for being ungrateful. After finishing his meal, he tries out magic infusion on himself, enhancing his physical and magical defenses. His appraisal skill also levels up, but it's still showing question marks on most of his items, which he finds odd. Deciding not to overthink it, he heads back out. While wandering the forest, Haruka feels blessed to find something, but it's just another mushroom. He's tempted to search for meat other than the one below, but reminds himself to practice his magic instead. His enhanced body now feels so light, it's almost like teleporting, and his dexterity has skyrocketed as well. He encounters a more powerful goblin and defeats it easily, gaining enough confidence to believe he could take on a group of 3. However, when he actually runs into such a group, his cowardice kicks in, and he decides to avoid more fighting for the day. By day 5, Haruka manages to defeat a goblin in a single strike and decorates his base with some fancy creations he made using magic. Pleased with how well his new life is shaping up, Haruka feels a sense of accomplishment. That night, while chasing a meaty rabbit, Haruka senses something unusual. To his dismay, it's his classmates. To make it worse, the ones approaching are the delinquents. Not wanting to get involved, Haruka checks the other direction using his clairvoyant skill and is horrified to see the big giant baddies. The jocks are also nearby, and though the nerds are close too, Haruka would rather not interact with them either. That leaves the class rep and her group. Haruka has known the class rep since grade school, and though it would be smart to make allies in this dangerous world, he stops himself. But in this moment of reflection, Haruka realizes how free and independent he feels, living on his own terms without anyone interfering. He values this newfound freedom more than anything and makes his final decision. They'll conquer this world alone without relying on anyone else, fitting for our true edgelord. While celebrating his loner status, Haruka got a little too carried away, making enough noise to catch the attention of the nearby delinquents. Panicking at the thought of being discovered and possibly getting backshots, he quickly dove into the bushes to hide. One of the smug delinquents, however, sensed something was off and began walking towards the bushes to investigate. Luckily for Haruka, a rabbit hopped by and distracted them, causing the delinquents to lose interest and walk away. Relieved, Haruka decided to follow them from a distance. The delinquents eventually gathered by a riverbank, casually chatting about typical guy stuff. Haruka was disgusted by their behavior, feeling grateful that the class rep was too sensible to ever be interested in guys like them. Suddenly, he noticed the delinquents had grabbed a nerdy classmate named Tanaka, treating him like a walking encyclopedia for answers about their abilities. After a while, they headed upstream to find the other classmates, but Haruka had no interest in joining them, so he returned to his cave and began cooking mushrooms. While checking his stats, he noticed his loner skill had leveled up, likely because he'd stayed away from the others. Despite this, he was still stuck at level 3, probably due to his Master of None skill, which made him good at everything but unable to focus on improving a single skill. Another skill, Blockhead, puzzled him as it seemed more like an insult than a useful ability. Trying to ease his worries, Haruka resorted to stress eating and went to sleep. Later that night, he was jolted awake by KSI's new song. Expecting to find the delinquents again, he was surprised to see the nerds engaged in an all-out battle with goblins. Their fighting skills, however, were about as effective as my 5 feet under grandmother's skills, which made Haruka chuckle. He considered whether to help, but when he checked their stats, he was shocked. The nerds had powerful cheat skills and were way higher level than him. He remembered that his class was filled with top-tier students, whether athletes, geniuses, or children of celebrities, making him the only average guy. Deciding the nerds could handle themselves, he headed back to sleep. But just as he was about to settle in, he sensed something nearby. Turning around, Haruka saw 2 goblins sneaking up on the nerds, ready to give them backshots. Feeling bad for them, Haruka decided to intervene. With a single swing of his big black thick staff, he knocked the goblins out, surprising the nerds who hadn't expected to see him there. They thanked him and followed him back to his cave. Upon seeing the beautiful, well-organized cave, the nerds were astonished. It was spotless, filled with useful items, and shockingly clean. They asked how he managed to set up such an impressive space. But Haruka simply replied that his earth magic and a few low-tier magic skills helped him out. Curious, Haruka then asked what had happened to the rest of the class. The mood shifted, and one of the nerds, glasses fogged up, looked down before explaining. He revealed that when the class had first been transported to this strange world, everyone was in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. But the nerds quickly figured things out, realizing they had cheat skills. Meanwhile, the big giant girls were whining, and the class rep was trying her best to calm everyone down. The delinquents, noticing the nerds weren't as scared, threatened them for information about this world. But before they could act, they were ambushed by goblins. Chaos broke out. The big giant girls cried, and even the delinquents scrambled into a corner. But this was the moment every nerd dreams of. The nerds sprang into action, using their knowledge of fantasy worlds to fend off the goblins with ease. The gym bros eventually joined in, and together they defeated all the goblins in the area. The class rep took charge again, leading everyone to a safer spot near the river where they could see approaching danger. The nerds then helped explain the basics of survival, and the class set up camp, with tasks assigned to each group. However, not everyone cooperated. The big giant girls were the first to rebel, deciding they didn't want to participate in setting up camp and leaving on their own. Seeing this, the delinquents followed suit. Despite the class rep's efforts to keep everyone together, the class fractured into smaller groups. The rep, along with the nerds and a handful of other students, tried to hold things together, but the nerds were forced to take on most of the work, from battling goblins to maintaining the camp. The nerds were also focused on raising their levels as quickly as possible to avoid falling under the control of two dangerous skills, both held by the delinquents. These skills could potentially control everyone else, and the only defense was a high level of magic resistance. Unfortunately, the delinquents caught on to this and began leveling up as well, determined to maintain their dominance and keep their skills in power. The nerds soon shared their plan with the class rep, who decided to train and level up as well. After a few days, the delinquents finally mastered the mind control skill and conveniently stumbled upon the class rep while she was walking nearby. Wasting no time, these scumbags tried to use their new skill on her, but the class rep was ready. She stunned them with a taser, leaving them writhing on the ground. The nerds helped carry the delinquents back to camp, where their plot was exposed and they were kicked out of the group. Unfortunately, the nerds' victory wasn't the happy ending they'd hoped for. The delinquents, fueled by rage, turned on their classmates. They burned down the camp and chased after the nerds to exact revenge. The entire camp was destroyed, and no one dared stand up to the delinquents, especially now that they had mind control abilities. This devastated the nerds, who had worked tirelessly to build the camp. To make matters worse, the class began blaming the nerds for everything, saying they shouldn't have provoked the delinquents in the first place. Slowly, everyone turned against them. Only the class rep stood up for them, but the situation had become too awkward. In the end, the nerds decided to leave. Haruka, amazed by what he just heard, hugged the nerds tightly and called them true heroes. To cheer them up, he threw a party where they stuffed themselves with mushrooms. The next morning, as they said their goodbyes, the nerds asked Haruka if he wanted to join their group, since he seemed to fit in well with them. They planned to head to a nearby town to become adventurers. But Haruka turned them down, reminding them that he's a loner. With a casual dismissal, he sent them off like a big brother shooing away younger siblings. Haruka decided to check on his remaining classmates, especially the class rep. On his way, he encountered a rabid wolf, which bit his arm. Despite the injury, he managed to knock the wolf out and kept moving. By nightfall, he reached the area where his classmates had been camped, only to find the remains of their camp. Using his tracking skills, he followed their footprints, but suddenly sensed a group of big giant girls heading straight for him. He tried to slip away, but they spotted him and shouted for him to stop. Haruka bolted, knowing he shouldn't get involved with them, but they caught up and demanded to know where the nerds were. Annoyed, Haruka asked if they just wanted the nerds to do their errands again. The big giant girls told him to shut up, admitting they'd realized their mistake and how the nerds had kept them a lie all this time. They just wanted to apologize. Haruka, unfazed, told them to let it go since the nerds were long gone. He warned that they'd be doomed if they chased after the nerds without knowing how to handle the monsters along the way. To his surprise, the girls started crying out of nowhere, saying they genuinely wanted to apologize. The captain of the big giant girls begged Haruka to teach them how to survive, promising to give him anything he wanted if he helped. Reluctantly, Haruka agreed. The girls followed him like lost puppies, attacking whatever Haruka killed. When one of the girls got injured, Haruka gave her a potion to heal herself, but she, being clueless, thought it was champagne and poured it all over him. Frustrated, Haruka wondered when he'd finally get back to his cave and relax. As he zoned out, the class rep spotted him and called out his name, seeming happy to see him. Haruka was too preoccupied to respond at first, but she finally got his attention by yelling. Startled, Haruka realized the class rep was standing right beside him. He began to wonder if this was finally his chance to get close to her, before the delinquents inevitably attacked again. This then marks the end of today's anime recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach our current goal of 20K subscribers.